All right, so this video is about what you need to know if you're going to be trying to take a pond from either an existing pond that's not working, that's just a dry hole that dries out really quick after it fills up, or a pond that never fills up, or if you haven't built a pond yet and you're considering it and you want to build a larger like livestock tank. This video is going to be all about what you should consider before you do that, and then once you start to do that, how you make sure that you have the highest chance of success. So the first thing that we think about whenever we're considering either fixing a pond or building a pond is, does it have enough catchment area to feed into it so that when there's a surface runoff event, the pond is actually going to be able to fill up. And the rule of thumb is that you want about 50 acres of catchment area to 1 acre of pond. And so you do that by looking at topography maps, also known as contour maps or topo maps. And we also have a really cool map package now that gets built into Google Earth Pro, so you can do your pond design. And so we can help you get those maps if you want to work with us on that. Of course, there's other ways to get them. They're much easier to get than they used to be. I'm glad to share. And so yeah, you want to make sure that you have enough inflow into your pond to actually fill it up. Otherwise, it's just never going to happen no matter how much rain we get. All right, so then the next thing that you want to think about is your soil type. And here we've got mostly sandy loam soil. There is some clay in it. You can see this is all subsoil that came out of the pond that we're talking about today. So the first thing that we did was we used a mini excavator to dig a test hole, and we dug as deep as we could. It was about 9 feet deep, and the pond was already 5 feet deep because there was already a pond, but it just wasn't working. So we dug down to about 14 feet total depth, and we were looking for a clay seam, a natural existing clay seam that would have allowed us to seal the pond without importing any liners. But it was all sandy loam all the way down, and so we knew that if we were going to make this pond work, we had to use a liner. A lot of people will use EPDM or HDPE liners, but we really don't like to use those plastic kind of petroleum-based liners, and so we decided to go with a bentonite liner in this case, which is a natural clay product. Of course, they have to mine it and ship it here, so there is an ecological cost, but we still felt like that was the best option in this case. So let's talk a little bit more about the different liner options. EPDM is very common for building smaller ponds, and I've heard it's less durable than the HDPE. Both of them are pretty technical. Both of them, it's really problematic if you end up getting a hole in them. They can be patched, but it takes specialized equipment to do it right. So they're not as durable as they could be, and you really need to have a crew that knows how to do that. So it's pretty difficult to do it yourself on a large scale anyway. Of course, plenty of people do it on a homestead scale, just with like a small landscape pond, right? That's more manageable. But they're very heavy and they're very expensive, and a lot can go wrong with that. So the pro is with those, and this could also be a con depending on how you think about it, that the water is completely sealed within that liner. So there is no communication between that water in the pond and the soil beneath the pond. Now with a bentonite liner, you're not going to get 100% seal. There might be 10% seepage, there might be 15% seepage. That's going to depend on how much bentonite you use and how much clay is in your soil to begin with, and how big and how deep your pond is, because that water is pressing down on the bentonite liner, so it can also work its way down. If you're doing this in rocky ground, your bentonite liner could get pushed down in between the rocks over time. So bentonite liners aren't perfect from a how much water are you holding in the pond standpoint. But if you have enough catchment area to fill the pond, even on smaller rain events like 2, 3, 4 inch rain events, if those are all adding water to the pond and it doesn't take a big flood to help contribute water to that pond, then I feel like the bentonite liner is a better option, because you're still able to have that communication and that connection between the pond and the greater water cycle. And also, like, if you change something upstream by creating more in-soak and suddenly you have springs popping out, I've heard of people that have used EPDM or HDPE liners and a spring popping out underneath that is actually a problem. Whereas in this case, if we had spring flow suddenly emerge into this pond, we would just be happy about that. All right, so the next thing that you want to think about digging a pond in Texas is, how deep can you make it? And part of this has to do with whether you're working in an existing valley or whether you're not. So the shape of the land where you want to dig the pond has a big impact on how much earth you're going to have to move in order to create a dam wall. And then you want to have depth without too much surface area, because evaporation is a really big part of our equation of, is this pond going to be a year-round pond? We can lose up to 90 inches just to evaporation on most years, and that is even worse in a really bad drought year. So we have to have that ratio of catchment area, depth, and to minimize our surface area as much as possible, because the more surface area you have, the more evaporation you're gonna have. And then the other thing is how steep the walls are gonna be. So you really wanna stay around a 3-to-1 or even a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning if you're traveling 3 feet linearly across the ground, you're only going down 1 foot. 2-to-1 is really too steep in my opinion. I'd rather be 4-to-1 to 3-to-1, but some people will go 2-to-1 and you can make it work, but it's just riskier as far as erosion, as far as like livestock actually being able to get into the pond, and a bunch of other factors that I won't geek out about right now. So we've talked about how water gets into the pond, but then you also have to consider how does water exit the pond when it needs to overflow. So this is called your spillway. I've seen a lot of ponds that have no spillway at all, and this can be a huge mistake because water is gonna go over your dam wall and it's gonna erode the wall and it's gonna essentially make your pond just go away. It's gonna blow it out eventually. So you need to have a spillway that is the right size and that takes the water around your dam wall and lets it out safely, so you're not getting side cutting and erosion of the dam wall, which is what is creating this pond in the first place. So you need to do some calculations on that, figure out what your catchment area is and how much water could be coming through your pond. If it's already full and you get another big rain, then how much water are you gonna have to handle, and how wide does your spillway need to be, and how much freeboard, the amount of area on your dam wall that never gets wet, do you need to make sure that all that water will exit the spillway instead of going over the top of your dam wall. All right, so you need to figure out what kind of equipment you're gonna use once you decide that this is a good place to build a pond and you can handle the water in the spillway. Then you need to decide, okay, how are we actually gonna dig this thing? So dozer is one of the fastest ways to do it. If you use a dozer, you wanna make sure it has a 6-way blade and rippers on the back of it. But that's a pretty steep learning curve if you've never operated heavy equipment before. You can dig a pond with a skid steer. You can do most of that work with a skid steer. I really like to have an excavator skid steer combo if I'm using smaller equipment, and that is what we did this pond with. It was about a 9-ton excavator and just a regular size skid steer. It wasn't even like the biggest skid steer you can get. And so the excavator was loosening and shaping and the skid steer was just moving material. Once you've moved all your material, oh, and I wanted to mention, you do want to scrape the topsoil off first and set it aside, and then use that to dress your dam wall and use it to dress the whole area, the skirt around the pond. Otherwise you lose all that fertility and all that seed bank that's in your topsoil. So topsoil is precious, don't waste it. All right, back to the digging. So once you start shaping the pond, you are gonna wanna compact it at some point, and really it's best to compact each lift of soil when you're building the dam wall. So you're gonna wanna use a roller, and you're gonna wanna put down about 6 inches of soil and then compact it with the roller if you can. And then it is also good to compact the whole basin of the pond as well. And if you have native clay soil, that compaction is gonna be the biggest factor in making sure that that clay soil holds water. If you have to bring in bentonite, well, we'll talk about that next. All right, so once you've got the pond dug, your topsoil is scraped, your pond is shaped, you've got the grades that you want, your spillways in place and all of that, now you're ready to put in your bentonite liner or other liner. Right? If you're putting in a different kind of liner other than bentonite, you might not have to do all that compaction, right? But so we got our bentonite in, it was dry in super sacks or 3,000 pound super sacks, and it came in on 18-wheeler truckloads, and we unloaded them, and we used a telehandler to then spread that material out, and then we used the excavator and the skid steer to spread it out a little bit more finely. In this case, we did have some clay content, so we were able to use about 4 pounds per square foot. I think the maximum they recommend is 5 pounds per square foot. So depending on what kind of soil you're starting with, you can look at what you need. It doesn't hurt to go more. It just costs money, of course. But if you go too little, then you might have to come back and add more, and that's hard, right? So you spread it out, you disc it in with a tractor, and then you wet it down, and then you overburden that bentonite liner layer with 6 inches of subsoil. And then you can compact all of that, the whole basin of the pond, with the roller. And then your liner should be good to go. A lot of people apply the liner in different ways, and so I just wanted to say that, you know, the way that we applied it is how I was taught, and it's working great in this case. We haven't had rain in 2 months, and this is only receded about 6 inches down. But a lot of people apply bentonite they mix it into a slurry and kind of spray it out, and that's not how we did it. So I know some people in the comments are probably gonna say we did it wrong, but hey, it's working, so. All right, so as you can see, we've got these limestone boulders all around the pond. like a little retaining wall, and then we have this river rock beach here. And this was sort of an evolution or how the project evolved, because when we first started talking about doing this project, there were no horses here. And then by the time we got around to actually creating this pond, 2 horses had joined the farm. And so these rescue horses, we were worried about them punching holes in the liner by walking down to get water. We were worried about them getting stuck in the pond. So we wanted to create some armoring. We wanted to create a little sort of deterrent to them walking into the pond in some places. And I also think it looks beautiful, and it creates a lot of habitat and a lot of surface area. And we noticed that as soon as we started putting these out, all sorts of amphibious creatures started to nest in between these rocks. And every time that you walk by, you just see them going in and hiding or jumping into the water. So I do think that this has helped a lot to create appeal for the wildlife to come down to this pond and start living here. So another function that these rocks serve is they help to prevent erosion. This is our main inlet on the pond, so most of our water is coming in through here. There's a few other inlets as well where a lot of water channelizes in. So these rocks are going to slow that water down and pacify it so that it doesn't cause deep erosion channels, which could create seepage points in the bentonite liner. And you can also see that down in the water, we've got these little walls of rock that are another line of defense that slows that water down, and the sediment gets deposited there. And that's also just going to help keep the pond water clean as well. So while we were at it with the rocks, we also got some larger, flatter stones, and we built these stone promenades or docks. So just so you can get out into the water and sort of immerse yourself in the experience. And if you want to swim, you can get into the water more easily and then get back out without moving through so much mud. We also put some river rocks skirting around this. And I just think it adds a lot of character and beauty and an invitation to interact with the pond. It's also a good place for the livestock, the goats and the horses that are out here to come down and get a drink. All right, so this is a really special feature that we included. Before water goes into the pond, it has to fill this up and settle. And this is because there's a big field that we're going to show you guys that is often fallow or has nothing growing in it intentionally in between crops. And they also spray various things over there. We're not really sure what all is going on, but it's very industrial agriculture. So we see spray rigs out there. So we wanted to give the water a chance to settle out anything that we can possibly get, sediment, chemicals, whatever it is, before it heads down into the pond. And we found that to be a really effective system. Also, as that water soaks into the ground here, some of it is going to also make it into the pond underground as well. So a pond is a part of a bigger water cycle, and you have to consider where the water is coming from. In this case, we've got a big field here. The water is all coming down the hill, and then there's a low spot in here, and it has to come this way before it can go under the highway and get down to the river. Obviously, we're not in control of that ground over there, so we can't control what happens with it, but all we can do is mitigate it. And especially when it's fallow like this, if we get a big rain, there's going to be a lot of sediment in the water. And so, if you want your water to be clear and clean, you're going to have to do something to mitigate that sediment carry if you're catching off of a big open field like this that gets tilled pretty regularly. So this is the back of the dam wall. And we made sure that as soon as we could after we were done with our earthworks phase to go ahead and seed this. We did a mix of cover crops with brown top millet, which is what you see mostly growing here, as well as dam wall stabilizer mix from Native American Seed Company. And we've just found that works really well. We seeded that out liberally. We covered it with organic hay, and then we used a K-line irrigation system to water that in. And if you don't seed and cover your dam wall, a lot of times it'll just stay bare, sometimes indefinitely, depending on how dry it is in that location, because the water in the pond, if the pond is well sealed, is not really benefiting the surface soil here. So this can be a really dry, steep place. And then over time, that can become a problem for erosion. And again, you risk actually losing the whole pond over a long enough time span if you don't get this area to revegetate. As you can see, when you start to add water to the landscape, plants just emerge. And we did seed all around here with riparian recovery and drain field mix. But a lot of these plants were just in the seed bank and they were just waiting for the right conditions, and they've started to emerge. And these are plants that you always see close to water. And if you're trying to find a spring and you find these plants, there's a good indicator that there's extra water in that location. So if you dig a pond and you don't seed, a lot of times things will naturally emerge. but I think it's much better to take advantage of that opportunity and just go ahead and buy some seeds that are for riparian zones, native seeds, and spread them right around the edge of the pond. And if you can cover them with a little bit of mulch or hay or even river rock like we did in this case, that's gonna help those seeds emerge. And you're gonna take advantage of that ecological niche that you've just created. And you're gonna be able to create a lot of biodiversity and a lot of habitat and forage that didn't exist before, that may not exist for miles around. So it's an opportunity that if you don't take it, well, then you might just end up with Bermuda grass and Johnson grass and stuff that's abundant elsewhere growing and holding that space around your pond. So I feel like it's one of the best things you can do that doesn't cost a lot of money, doesn't take a lot of work. If you're gonna build a pond, just go ahead and add a huge diversity of seeds that like to have wet feet right around the pond as soon as you can. So we also took it one step further here with planting, and we went ahead and we got some pond plants, trying to make sure that they're not gonna be too invasive, and trying to choose plants that we see in the native environment. So we've got horsetail reed, we've got vetiver grass, we've got papyrus, we've got hibiscus, Texas hibiscus, and blue arrow reed are the things that we've planted around here. And these plants are gonna spread and they're gonna take over these banks, and it's gonna be beautiful. It's gonna be really diverse, also mixed with the seeds that we put all around the pond. And I think we're just gonna see the wildlife utilizing these for nesting and for food, and that it's gonna really bring this pond to life. So of course, anytime that we can plant riparian trees, we love to do that. In this case, we've got bald cypress or Montezuma cypress. I'm actually not sure which one this is here, but Montezuma cypress is a little bit more drought tolerant, but still likes to be close to water. So we planted these trees close to the pond, but not right on the pond. So we've got these different layers of how close does the plant like to be to water. And the cypress trees are probably the ones that would like to be right up on the water the most, but we set them back, they're on irrigation, and just over time you can imagine as this area gets filled with a canopy of cypress trees, and then it has some of these lower growing trees like false indigo and mulberry, and we've got some elderberry trees in here, and we've got some oaks a little further back. Just the whole pond being surrounded by a diversity of trees that benefit from the extra moisture, but also help to create a more humid environment, a more shaded environment, and continue to develop this ecological niche that we're building here going outward. So I think one of the main messages is that when you're building a pond, you're not just creating a body of water, you're creating an ecological niche, as I keep saying, that is gonna bring more biodiversity opportunity. And if you can build upon that, then you're working with nature instead of against it. But you do have a window of opportunity that you need to take advantage of, because if you don't fill that void, then something else opportunistic will, and then you'll have to fight that back. But once you've done a bunch of earthworking, usually there's a lot of open space, a lot of void that you can fill. So jump into that void as quick as you can. But one thing not to do is plant your trees on the dam wall itself. The root systems of the trees over time can create channels that are gonna allow that water to travel through your dam wall. And then when the tree dies, that root system decomposes, and then you've got even more of an open channel. And so over time, trees can break down and create more porosity on your dam wall. So you don't wanna plant them there, and if you see saplings naturally coming up, you do wanna control them on that location. But everywhere else around your pond, let the trees be. So anytime that you're building a pond, it's a little bit of a leap of faith. You've done your calculations, you've done your test hole, but you're about to expend a bunch of resources and energy, and you're gonna be trying to create a result that ultimately you won't know whether it worked or not until you get a big rain. And in Texas, we don't know when that's gonna be. So every time that I have built a pond, it has been a little bit nerve-wracking, because you have to take that leap of faith, right? And in our case, in Symbiosis' case, we're working with clients and they're putting their trust in us, and we want to make sure that we take care of that trust, right? So this particular pond has an interesting story, because we were in the midst of preparing to dig it, and then the horse factor came into play, and it was like, oh shoot, are the horses actually just going to punch this liner and make all of this work and all this resource expenditure moot? And so we got a little concerned about that. We came up with the plan to armor the edges with the river rock and with the limestone boulders, and we said, okay, we can do that. We can fence off the pasture. We can keep the horses out of here as we need to. And so that'll mitigate that issue. And so we decided to push ahead with that. But once we started digging the pond, everything was going smoothly, and we did it in the middle of summer, because another factor is you don't want to get a big rain when you're in the middle of digging the pond, because then the whole pond could fill up and you won't be able to finish, right? And then it's too muddy to work for a month on end. So that actually did start to happen to us when we were in the midst of building the pond. We got enough rain to fill it up about a foot. And so we actually had to pump that water out of the pond. And then we continued digging once it was dry enough. That delayed us about a week, and we got more done. And then it rained again enough to fill up the pond part of the way. And we pumped it out one more time. And then just as we were finishing the earth moving part of the project, but we weren't done with placing the rocks, we had just started to place the rocks, and we had just gotten some of our rocks down in the water in place. That next day, we got the July 4th rains began. So we stopped on that Friday, I think it was, and then July 4th was on a Saturday, I believe. And so it was the very next day that Kerrville, which is only 20 minutes from here, got 20 inches of rain. And so this pond filled up overnight. And luckily we were done enough, and we had gotten the liner completed. We weren't midway through the liner, but we found out pretty quick whether this was going to work or not in that moment. And the pond actually overflowed. Thank goodness we didn't get the full 20 inches of rain here, because if that were the case, then that would have been a lot of water flowing through here. And actually the Pedernales River might have risen above the highway, and this whole thing might have been a floodplain in that case. Technically, the floodplain goes above the height of this pond. So anytime that you're working with these big catchment areas, floodplains, flood events, and all these different variables, and working with nature in general, there's always an element of risk, and there's always an element of taking a leap of faith. And so you really want to do all of your engineering ahead of time and make sure that you've done everything in your power. And then you also have to admit to yourself that there's a lot of stuff that's still just out of your control. So there's always going to be some risk. We do what we can to mitigate it, and then we kind of just have to surf the waves and adapt whenever something comes our way that's a curveball, and find the best solution available to us to solve whatever problems arise along the way.
This video is made possible by our patrons. Their support allows us to continue to share our educational resources, knowledge, and make these videos for you to enjoy. To get access to additional content from our projects, Q&A priority, and more, click the link below.
All right, hey, thanks guys. Appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to learn more about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, you can hop over to our website. There's tons of good articles. You can join our newsletter. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. We'd love to see you there and answer your questions. Thanks again. Enjoy.